And thank y'all very much for coming out. I know we appreciate the Tribune for live streaming this for us, so I know we have a number of audience members that are watching us live real fast. But thank y'all very much for coming out. We're going to spend the next hour talking about
the new zoning regulations, which if you've looked at the document, it's 300 pages long. There are over 1,000 footnotes with a footnote for every time there's a change or a reference. So it's really not possible to give a brief overview of the regulations and really do it any justice, but we're going to do our best this afternoon to get through as much of it as we can. So sort of just a broad overview of what it does. It modifies sort of the base zoning districts. One of the centerpieces for the new zoning regulations would be the form-based standards for downtown. It also modifies and creates new subdivision regulations and modifies existing parking regulations. So I'll touch a little bit on the regulating plan and the stuff that affects downtown. Essentially, this is the regulating plan which shows where, depending on what proper or what color street you own property on, those are the regulations that are going to be in effect for your property. It will restrict the minimum building height, the maximum building height, open area requirements. There will be a lot of site restrictions based on where you are located on this map. So it's color coded. There's 4 different types of forms: urban general west, urban storefront, townhouse, small apartment. So I'll just briefly run through some of the restrictions on each type of frontage. So the urban general are all the lots that front on an orange street. Again, that's kind of a zoomed in close-up of what would be urban general. You have a 2-story minimum at the required building line, which is a term defined in the code itself. Basically, it requires buildings to be built to the sidewalk to encourage a walkable downtown. You have either a 6-story maximum building height or a 10-story maximum building height, depending on where you're located. The cross-hatched area that's shown on the map is the 10-story maximum building height. Again, you have to have a private or public open area equal to 15% of the total buildable area. Again, those are terms defined in the code itself, and we won't get down into the nitty-gritty of that today. Ground stories in urban general can be used for commercial, residential, public, or institutional purposes, and upper stories can only be used for residential or commercial. Urban storefront would be properties that front on a red street. The primary distinction being here is that on the first floor, the ground story uses are supposed to be limited to retail, food and beverage, or personal service. You also have restrictions on the transparency of the ground story windows. You have to be able to see to a depth of 15 feet. You can't place shelving in front of the windows. Again, that's to have an active street and sidewalk environment. So everyone asks, what is downtown going to look like and what sort of buildings will be permitted? These are images from the draft code itself. One thing that's different about this set of zoning regulations is it relies heavily on images and charts and tables as opposed to just text. So these are images provided by the consultant of buildings that would conform with the new zoning regulations. Again, you'll see they're built to the sidewalk, they're generally tall, dense, those type of structures. Additional,
okay?
Yeah, that's fair.
What can the video pick up still?
Sure.
I can just.
Again, more images of the urban general, urban storefront building type. Urban general west would be the west end of downtown. You have a minimum building height of 1 story, maximum building height of 6 stories. Private and public open area equal to 10% of the total buildable area. Here's what Urban General West buildings will look like. Again, these are images from the consultant. Do allow for fast food restaurants. Here's where the Urban General is generally located in downtown, generally west of Providence. Townhouse small apartment is intended to be on the fringe of downtown, sort of the buffer between your dense development and adjacent residential neighborhoods. You have a 2-story minimum, 4-story maximum. Again, there are design restrictions that would apply to this that are spelled out more in more detail in the code itself. One primary or one important distinction between this building form and the other building forms we've talked about are that only office and residential uses are permitted in the townhouse small apartment designation. So if you've got property that fronts along the blue, you can only use those for office, bed and breakfast type facilities or residential facilities. Again, here's where it's generally located, again, kind of on the. And here's what the consultant suggested the townhouse small apartment would look like. Subdivision regulations. There are a lot of new subdivision regulations that have been proposed in the new zoning regulations. One of the important differences is now that when you bring forward a plat for a subdivision, you're required to provide a land analysis map. That land analysis map has to show any designated sensitive areas. And the code is generous in how it defines sensitive areas. It includes stream corridors, floodplains, steep slopes, habitat for endangered species, and as well as views, cultural and or historical features, burial mounds, wildlife habitat, wildlife corridor. If you have any land that falls into this definition of sensitive area, then you're prohibited from building on that property. You're required to record a preservation easement, and no building envelope can be in any sensitive area. Here is a map from Columbia Imagined of what it considers to be sensitive area, or areas that are generally sensitive, and that's the cross-hatched green section along the fringe. And you'll see that there are areas that, for example, Discovery Ridge, that is indicated in red and blue as being a neighborhood or a business and employment district that's also shown as a sensitive area. So there's some question about how those are going to relate to each other and how that would play out. Other subdivision regulation changes, a preliminary plat is currently good for 7 years. Now it will only be good for 2 years. In other words, when you submit a plat for approval, you'll have to begin construction within 2 years. The length of cul-de-sacs is generally reduced, or the maximum length of cul-de-sacs is generally reduced. The number of dwelling units off of a single access point is reduced from 100 to 30. And again, there are a lot of changes in the zoning regulations, and I would encourage everyone, I know it's a long document and no one wants to read it, but I would encourage you to dig into it. Parking is generally reduced overall for downtown. It carries forward the current C2 parking requirements. No minimum except for residential uses. A quarter of a space per bedroom. You can satisfy that on-site or within half mile of the residential use. There is a maximum on parking that you can provide downtown. And there are also new bicycle parking minimums. Everywhere else. So this is parking that applies everywhere that's not in the downtown or the existing C2 district. Generally, again, parking is reduced. For retail uses, for restaurants, parking is reduced. It carries forward the ability to satisfy the parking requirements through the use of shared parking. And a new provision allows you to satisfy the use of, or satisfy the minimum parking through the use of public parking spaces. The parking maximum applies to downtown and large structures outside of downtown. And in that case, the maximum is just 125% of the minimum. So generally, the parking stuff is either reduced or the existing requirements are carried forward. One question that keeps coming up is nonconformities. What happens to my property if I have property downtown that's a one-story building, it doesn't meet the two-story minimum, or I don't satisfy the design requirements under the zoning regulations? Technically, everything is grandfathered in. There are provisions that deal with non-conforming uses and non-conforming buildings. We believe that the consultant recommended, and we believe will ultimately be incorporated into the final draft, that a non-conforming building can be expanded by 25% without having to bring the entire building into compliance. In other words, a one-story building could have a one-story addition. If there's damage to the structure and it's a residential structure, you can rebuild it without bringing it into compliance with the code. If it's a mixed-use building or it's a non-residential building and the damage exceeds 75% of the building value, you have to rebuild the entire thing in compliance with the code. Non-conforming uses, this refers to a use that's legal today, but then as a result of this new regulation is illegal. You couldn't do that on the property under the new regulations. A good example would be a restaurant in industrial property. Currently, you can have, in the industrial districts, you can have a restaurant. Under the new code, they've taken that away to make industrial districts a truly industrial special purpose district. So if you have a restaurant in property that's zoned M1 today, it would be a non-conforming use if this is adopted. You can continue to use your building for non-conforming use as long as you don't stop for a period of 12 months. If you stop continuing with the restaurant example, if you stop using the restaurant for 12 months, you lose the ability to go back in and restart it. If you switch uses, if you switch to conforming use, you can't go back to the non-conforming restaurant use, for example. A non-conforming use can be expanded throughout the building. For example, if you're just using a small portion of the overall building for a restaurant in an industrial district, you could expand the restaurant to include the entire building. If the building generally conforms with the zoning regulations and the design standards, you can actually even expand the non-conforming use by 25%. So I think that is the end of my brief overview. I don't know if we want to take questions or if we just
Move on to the next one.
move on to the next one. All right. Yeah.
Well, I'm up next. My name is Katie Essing, and I'm the Executive Director for the Community Improvement District downtown, known as the District. And I'm going to probably skip up. My first few slides talked about the MDT, and CAleb did a very nice job of explaining that piece. So I'm going to fast forward through a few slides that talk about the draft code. This was obviously such a big change for our downtown that our board and constituents have been looking at this very closely throughout the process. And one of the big changes is that the code is intended to help eliminate the need to go to the Board of Adjustment for different things. So it's intended to be by right. As CAleb mentioned, the NDT would replace the existing C2 area and then part of the M1. So he did a great job of talking about the regulating plan, which is that key document, and then the different standards of urban general west, urban storefront, and then townhouse small apartments. So regulating plan, obviously a very important document to be able to look at where things fall. And then a few of the different, I know for us, we were learning about all these different definitions and how they apply throughout the code in downtown. So just a quick look at those. So I'll skip past this and kind of get to the good stuff. Our group has been actively engaged in going through the code, and Clarion, as part of their process with the city, did 2 tests to check on the code, and they were both on student housing and didn't include a financial review. And we really were asking a lot more questions like, how much more will it cost to come into compliance, and will we still be able to have the projects that are happening today? We have a very strong, vibrant downtown. So our board and other partners in the community hired a Winter & Company to help do more tests to find out, how will this impact our downtown development community and different projects? Will things be feasible? Will they be possible based on our different lots, more than just student housing? We have a report which is from this consultant, Winter & Company. It's available on our website, discoverthedistrict.com, and I'm happy to share hard copies with you as well if you're interested. So these tests were meant to basically almost try to break the code before it goes into ordinance, try to find out what are issues that might happen, are there any unintended consequences that could occur. So the consultant, Winter & Company, worked with our board and partners to identify different scenarios downtown if you might try to develop, and what kind of questions might come up and what kind of issues might there be. So went through their 6 different tests that were reviewed, and then a financial consultant was also brought in called Urban Advisors, and they help run the numbers, looking at the cost to build in Columbia, the current rents, both for commercial, retail space, and then apartments. Would things actually be affordable to change out? So I'll just give a very brief overview and give you the summary observations from this testing, and then be happy to answer questions or share this report with you. Basically, Winter & Company, who does work closely with Clarion and Farrell Madden, who did the MDT portion, all leaders in their industry, and they found that it was a very sound code, very well written. It enhanced the public realm and promotes new development. So principles include having a strongly defined street edge, being pedestrian friendly, reducing the visual and physical impact of cars, and then discourage uses that aren't urban in character. Essentially, it's a downtown where you want to live and work and play as it grows. They did find some opportunities that the code could be refined, some questions that they had, and if they have those questions, then possibly other people will. So it's a good time to work out those details now before it goes into ordinance. And that will help make it more predictable for folks as they go through that process, and less interpretation by different folks. So just so we have also a letter that we have submitted to Planning and Zoning. Thursday night is the MDT public hearing portion in front of Planning and Zoning. So if you're interested in joining that meeting, we have our letter on our website, and I can share that with you as well. But it talks about some of the recommendations that we would like to see, bringing more clarity to the standards, using a few edits just to take away anything that's ambiguous, and then also add flexibility in a few of the standards. Overall, it found that the code was really pretty good if you had a really big project ground up. But if you had a very small project, a quarter of a block or less, and you're trying to come into compliance, you could have a really hard time at meeting some of the requirements, like the open space on the ground level, the parking setback. Street walls are a big discussion currently. The code calls for kind of a masonry type street wall, and that could be quite a different downtown. So looking at different pieces like that. But I've got the full presentation, but I know we have a limited time. I want to get to your questions at the end, so I'll go ahead and pass it over to my partner next, and then can answer questions at the end if you want to go further.
Thank you, ma'am. The baton is
The baton is passed.
I'm on the desktop. Sorry.
Hi, I'm David Goodson. I'm the president of the Tri-State Sign Association, and we're affiliates of the International Sign Association. We represent Kansas, Missouri, and Oklahoma. I'm here today to talk to you about EMCs and the economic value of signage.
He's a PDF, not a
Yeah.
PowerPoint.
Yeah, I got you.
EMCs in the sign business is referred to electronic message centers. You may have heard them called digital displays or changeable copy signs. An EMC is capable of displaying words, symbols, figures, images, pictures, and it can be changed electronically or by automatic means. It does so by using light emitting diodes, LEDs, and LEDs is one of the most advanced forms of lighting there is today. And we take LEDs, we combine them into a pixel, we combine pixels into modules, and modules into, to make a display.
Little technical difficulties here.
Here we go. So it's obvious why businesses and even not-for-profits like churches and schools, they want to use these kinds of signs. They get attention by passers-by, and they can just broadcast several messages throughout the day. They look crisp and attractive. And I can tell you that every business we work with that has these types of signs give us testimonials as to the effectiveness of them and how they've increased sales. And these are just some examples of signs that we've done across Missouri where they're allowable. The MFA sign in Mexico, Missouri. There's a bank sign here at Woodman Houston in Springfield. Warsaw, Missouri, a subway. Of course, everybody's familiar with the university sign. Break time using this technology, and a church sign there in the Blue Springs area.
We may have difficulties going all the way through this thing here.
So why do businesses want EMCs? These signs allow business owners to advertise the point of purchase, which is vital for retail in today's environment. They are very cost effective to advertise specials or events or other time sensitive promotions since they can be changed instantly. They rapidly adjust to market conditions and they appeal to younger markets. The millennials love these types of signs. We've got lots of research. If you look here at the sign on your left, that's a typical multi-tenant shopping center sign. As you can see, it's cluttered, it's hard to read, it's really not very attractive. In a lot of cases, signs like this can rejuvenate business. If you look at the sign on the right, that's the same shopping center that has 3 anchor tenants displayed in it, along with the digital sign. And when this shopping center changed their sign out, the only thing they did was they were failing, they were in trouble. They didn't have retention of tenants. When they put the new sign in, they've become successful. They've been able to maintain tenants, and it certainly cleaned up the image of the shopping center. So, in other words, why do businesses want these signs? There hasn't been a single person that we've sold an EMC to that's regretted it. Many of them have been eager to share their success with us. If you look here, the first testimonials from a Subway franchisee, and the one in Warsaw, Missouri, he says that since he's installed this sign, he's seen increased sales of every product that they've displayed on it. If you look at the picture there, the Rick Ball Ford sign in Sedalia, Missouri, Rick Ball says, our digital sign has proven to be a very effective marketing tool. We have increased sales of new cars, services by utilizing our full color display at our dealership. We are currently having a larger display built for our new dealership under construction in Boonville. So people who own these are very vocal about how well they work to improve their business. Despite widespread success by businesses using these types of signs and everything that comes with the success, local governments often restrict the use of EMCs. Government usually has 2 main justifications for doing so: aesthetics and traffic safety, both of which would be very legitimate concerns if they were true. We have I apologize for It is true that these signs can be programmed to be too bright at night, which is why the sign industry has put together recommendations on how bright EMCs should be at night. I've brought copies of different handouts that are available if you'd like those after the meeting. They were developed by prominent lighting scientists who specialize in LED lighting and lighting in general. The brightness recommendations have been adopted in part or in whole or in part by over 200 local jurisdictions across the United States. EMCs can also reduce clutter. As we just saw with the multi-tenant sign, I showed you in the previous slide, it's just common sense that these signs can put out multiple messages and they clean out. There's not as need to have as many signs when you have a digital display. EMCs often look better than manual changeable copy signs. We've all seen the signs where they're using an S for a 5 or a 5 for an S, letters missing. So the digital is just a lot more attractive. Often cities use EMCs. Often cities ban the use of EMCs because they'll say things like, "We don't want our city to look like Las Vegas." But the kinds of signs that we're talking about here in Columbia and EMCs are typically going to be under 100 square foot or less. The signs we're talking about in Las Vegas or New York City on Times Square, we're talking about 10,000 square feet signs. So while it's the same technology, nowhere on the same scale or level as what you see in Las Vegas or New York City. Most of the time, like I say, they'll always be under 100 square feet, and they're far enough set back from the road, and rarely does full animation is that allowed. As far as traffic safety, there's been very recent research by prominent universities and the federal government providing that these kinds of signs are not dangerous. Texting is far more dangerous. When you look at the safety of these signs, there's never been a proven automobile accident based upon a sign. We have studies from Texas A&M that are available as well to look at the traffic studies and the safety of the signs. And also, if you kind of look at that, there's probably been more distracted by looking at mountain scenery as you drive or trying to read a bumper sticker on a car than ever by a digital sign. EMCs can be programmed so they'll scroll. Kind of in summary, EMCs help to improve business performance. EMCs help to increase sales tax revenue. And in some cases, EMCs will even improve employment opportunities as a business grows by use of their sign. EMCs help reduce the EMC can make a business more valuable, more viable. It can produce a lot more income by hitting that point of purchase, advertising, and quickly changing to the changing environments for retailers face. EMCs can also reduce sign clutter and make unreadable signs readable, and EMCs are not dangerous or distracting. So as we move forward in all of our changes here in Columbia, we just wanted to make everybody aware of EMCs are not a bad thing. They're a good thing for business. And if you have any questions at all, I'm always available, or you can contact the ISA directly. I contacted David Hickey, and again, we have handouts for brightness, EMC regulations, and just general information pertaining to how it would affect us in a sign code issue. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. My name's Mark Farnen. I'm with Strategist Communications here in Columbia. And a lot of what I do is, some people call it fight with City Hall. That is not true. More often than not, I work with City Hall and with people who have questions about what's going on at City Hall. And so what I want to do is give you a preview or a glimpse of how you can become a part of the process and affect change in those areas where it's important to you. As Caleb mentioned earlier, this is a huge document. More than 300 pages, more than 1,100 footnotes and paragraph tags and changes and that sort of thing. And so it's difficult to get your head wrapped around the whole thing. It's even a little more difficult now than it was when this process began. And I just want to talk about that really quickly. This is called the Unified Zoning Ordinance. If you see UDO, that doesn't make any sense because everybody goes, no, it's a zoning code, it should be the ZC. It's the UDO in some, but it's the Unified Zoning, or Unified Development Code. I call it Unified Zoning Code. This effort was in response. We passed an interim downtown C2 zoning ordinance, and that was basically in response to all the new student housing and high rise, and it seemed like there was just too much going on, and basically that's why they passed that C2. This then is the follow-up to that, to make the whole code, and the whole code, not just the downtown, but this unified. That's why they call it unified. It's supposed to encompass the whole town, and it's supposed to provide clarity and predictability and ease of use and fairness for anybody who has property or wants to use it in some way. They hired Clarion Consultants and Farrell Mann. Those were the two primary consultants. They made a recommendation, and what that resulted in was an October 2015 document that was, here is what we think the draft is. They built that based on several public meetings, open meetings, and conversations with the consultants. So there was a lot of give and take. You could go in, you could meet with those guys, and first maybe they'd go meet with a neighborhood, and then they'd go meet with the Chamber of Commerce, and then they'd go meet with another group, and they'd write down all those notes. Then they put all of that together with what they had suggested, and that's what we got in 2015. Then some people looked at that and said, I think you're still missing. So Clarion developed a memo, put that on top of it, sent that back to the city, and in May of this year, they came out with the revised Unified Draft Ordinance draft, or at least a half of it. And that came out in May of 2016. So that's how the process has gone. And that's what I just said. Since then, when I said that there had been a half of it that had been produced, that was in May of 2016, and it was about the first 160 pages. Since that time, city staff has taken some of the additional modules in there, or the additional chapters, and there have been 3 more pieces that are a part of that whole unified draft. It's confusing to some people. So you have to look at 4 things right now, and you're gonna have to look at 5 by the end of it, or maybe 6. But you have to look at 4 different pieces to understand where we are now in terms of the revised draft. Don't use the one from 2015. Use the one that starts in May, and then you'll see 3 more updates. Where are those? They're on the city's website. The page looks like that. The easiest way to find it is go to the search box at the top and just put in zoning code project planning. And that page will pop up. And then right below that chart, you'll see a list of stuff. And that's where you'll find the copy, the working copy, draft, revised version of what people are talking about now at the planning and zoning meetings. But it's very important to use the revised one because that's where you'll see the most current updates, footnotes, margin notes. There's also something that appears there today, as of yesterday afternoon, and that's a spreadsheet. And that spreadsheet basically is the way that the city is now accounting for the ideas that have been proposed to the Planning and Zoning Commission in public testimony and in written form. What they've done is, it's just an Excel sheet. It lists any issue that is brought up. It gives one column that indicates this is the part of the code that it has to do with. It says this is the answer we kind of gave them. Do we think this was a good enough answer? And it'll have a Y or an N, yes or no. And in some cases they go, we did it, we got it, don't worry about this anymore. And in some places they gave an answer, said no, this needs a little bit more. And in the last column they say, here's what we think we still got to work on. It's very instructive to see what city staff believes is the correct answer to the problem that has been posed versus what you may think. And you may want to use that to evaluate where the council and where the city may stand on a particular issue and where planning and zoning may stand on this. The problem is, and the frustrating thing that I think you will find as you get into this process is there's not as much give and take. Remember when I said that when they had the Clarion and the consultants, you'd come in and sit at a table and you could go back and forth and just go, man, this is wrong. Here's what we really need to do. Or you go, that's a pretty good idea, we didn't think about that. And it was a back and forth, give and take, and you could take a couple hours if you needed to. At this point, the hearings that are informal for most part are being conducted by planning and zoning, and that has a different set of rules that sits on top of it. So you go and you make a public presentation, and you'll get 3 to 5 minutes, and they've been pretty generous about the amount of time you get to talk. And you can ask staff questions back and forth a little bit, but there's not much interaction between the planning and zoning commissioners and you. So you don't know where you quite stand. Till we got that spreadsheet, now we can start to see where we believe there's going to be some reaction to what you have said so far. And at least there's a catalog of the things that have been talked about. So what I would encourage you to do is get that spreadsheet, look through it, and then either write a letter or show up at one of these. The schedule that is left for the proposed schedule for what is left for you to have an opportunity to do that is on the right. There's a meeting on Thursday night of planning and zoning, and that's the one that everybody expected to be the big circus. I mean, this is like the big night at the Boone County. This is Wednesday night, arm band night. This is the one where everybody's going to come out. And it's because it's about the downtown. But this is the Unified Development Ordinance, and it covers things, as Caleb mentioned, that have to do with subdivision regulations, with tree cover, with protection, neighborhood protection, with land use of all sorts. And so even though they've divided it into topics on each of the different days, they're pretty generous about letting you come up and spout off about anything you want. You can talk about any part of the code on any night, but what you won't get is an immediate reaction. It's important to make your point, though. This is where you have access to the public process, and it's not a losing proposition. This is where you can make a difference. This is what they encouraged public participation to be. And this is a chance to do it. There's what they say is the schedule now. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But here's what I can suggest to you to make the process easier for you and more efficient for everybody involved, including city staff, planning and zoning, and the city council. You have to read the code. Oh, man. You have to read the code. And there are going to be some parts that you just think, I can skim over that, okay, but do it at your own peril, because there's stuff in there that it will make a difference to you or possibly could. I'm going to give an example, and I've given this before, but I grew up upstairs at a funeral home. And my father and my brother are still engaged, or my dad was engaged, and my brother still owns a funeral home in Mexico, Missouri, home of Tyronn Lue, the head coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers, by the way. And so I've been around the funeral business all my life. I don't work for them. I don't work for any mortuaries here. But when I was reading through the code, I saw one provision, and it said, all mortuary facilities have to be in a completely enclosed building. And I didn't understand why. Because most funeral homes that I know about have this little patio part coming out. And there's an open airway. And it's where they drive the hearse in, they bring the casket out at the end of the funeral. They have the polar bears. I call them polar bears. It's pallbearers. But when we were little kids, we called them polar bears. The pallbearers take the casket out, put it in the back of the hearse. And it's for respect for the deceased and the convenience of people in Missouri weather when they're having a funeral and it's raining. There's no reason to not have that ability to have that. It doesn't have to be a totally enclosed building. So why put it in there? So I wrote it up. And I wrote it up like I did on the side over here. Instead of just saying this is stupid, I put, here is an issue statement. And I just said, this doesn't make sense. Then what I did that really helps is I made a section citation. And I put the exact section where that appears in the code. This is not for my convenience. This makes my work a little bit harder. But it is for the convenience of the staff and the planning and zoning and city council so that they can identify it quickly, immediately, and take action on it. And right now, those guys are overworked. They have too much work to do. If you can do that part of it for them, it makes it easier for them to include it, make it common. If you look at the spreadsheet now, They took it, oh, and then I put just a little argument, and I just say, here's what it says, this is why I don't think it should be. And then I put this thing called other factors. And I just said, they do this all over Missouri, they do this all over the United States, and it's a smart idea, so why don't we do that? And then said, make a choice. That's what it says. If you look at the spreadsheet now, they did take this comment, they took it into consideration, it has the exact citation, and then it says, staff comment, we'll look at it. Did we solve this? No. And then in the last thing it says, this makes sense, let's change it. Hey, we won. And it's not on a big thing, but that's the kind of thing where if you want to do change, do have their work for them. Let them make an informed decision rather than guessing at it. And here's a format for doing it. I brought some of these little sheets just so you can help. It's just a little worksheet. But it's the way that you can do it responsibly and where it can really make a difference. I would say take one of these sheets, work that up, then turn that in along with your fiery letter, because nobody feels good about just turning in this worksheet. And turn in your fiery letter that gets all angry and stuff, Paul. And then it gives the whole thing in context, but it also gives a very instructive way of how to affect this code that's going to be here for longer than I live. This is going to be here for the next 40 or 50 years. If this is your chance to do it and do it right. Or go to the P&Z meeting, you'll get 3 to 5 minutes or so, talk about what you want, and use this as your outline. Just use it as your outline. This is real easy. If you do that, you get in 3 minutes. You outline your deal, nobody gets mad at you, and you're fine. Or meet with your council member or somebody that you know on planning and zoning and talk to them. There you will get that interactive deal. You can go down and meet Carl down at Coffee Zone on Saturday morning and holler at him for an hour. And he'll take it. He won't agree with you maybe, but he'll take it. And that's the way you have to do this right now, or it's not, or you're not going to be able to affect change. Yeah. Earlier I put up a schedule that said, here's about how the process is going to go. I don't know about that. This whole project was supposed to be done on December 31st of this past year. That's when it was supposed to be done. That didn't happen. And there's reasons for that. This is huge. This is Donald Trump huge. This is Bernie Sanders huge. And it's so much information, it's become so overwhelming, and it has taxed so many resources in this town that it's behind. It's behind. We've also had so many different competing interests, and people in this town are simply not shy. And we get it from neighborhood associations, we get it from the nature of the topics. Everybody has an opinion about student housing, about parking, about neighborhood protection, about land use and property rights. And so we've had a lot of competing interests jockeying for the way that this thing ought to be written, and that has held it up some. We have 2 task forces that are supposed to be commenting on this. One that has almost been newly created. Part of it was done last night at the city council meeting. Their first meeting, which is the parking task force, is supposed to happen in July. But if you go back to this calendar of events, you'll notice that the topic for discussion on July 7th, which will be at least one day before the first meeting of the parking task force, topic for discussion is new parking. They won't have their report in. They won't even have met yet. And if that's the case, there may need to be more time given to these people to adequately consider the effects of parking on the downtown area and in all other parts of this community. And so when you go down and talk about the thing that you want to talk about, whether it's funeral homes or tree cover or whatever it is, you may want to say, I'd like to ask about the process too. And I'd like to ask if this time frame is still true or not. We have some other task force, the Mayor's Task Force on Infrastructure. Their reports are overdue as of today. And then code testing has given us some new insights. I think it's very legitimate to talk about process and timing on this, as well as content of the code, and you may want to include that in your remarks if you have an opinion about it. There is no absolute date by which this must be done. We've already passed that. That was supposed to be December 31st of last year. So if you have conversations and you're so inclined, don't hesitate to comment on that. I'm happy to take questions, and I would love it if you'd ask all my questions to Caleb, because he's thank you.
All right, I'd like to thank all of our presenters today. We're going to take some questions now. I do have a sheet here that's front and back that has the planning and zoning meetings between now and August. So please, I'll hand this out after we're done. But let's take questions. Does anybody have any questions from the audience?
There's, on that regulating plan for downtown, there are corner streets that have orange and have blue. If you have a corner property, what is the selection, the most restrictive or the most permissive?
Well, it'd be whatever, the building that faces the orange part, that's gonna have to comply with the urban general. The portion on the street that fronts blue, that's gonna have to comply with the townhouse.
Wow.
That's a fair question.
That's-
Are you saying, you're saying that it's by designated, whatever the frontage designation?
Right. Now, you can, where it changes, you can continue either form for 50 feet. So that would probably be how you would alleviate, you know, assuming that's consistent with the length of your building, how you would address some of that.
Caleb, what's the rationale for that?
Allowing you to continue the usage.
No, why is it important to make sure that either blue street or a red street or orange street, and why does anybody care?
I think the intention is you want all of the dense, tall development in the core, and as you move out, you transition to smaller building heights, more residential uses as you approach residential areas. Now, again, that does create a lot of problems on some of the fringe areas. For example, the North Village Arts District is a pretty industrial, but it's shown as being townhouse. You know, the buildings that are there today don't look like the pictures that the consultant has proposed for what should be there. So I think that is problematic on the fringe. But
on the conforming, non-conforming, we talk about, it looks like you can stay non-conforming unless you stay below, you go above 25% on expansion, correct?
I believe the consultant is incorporating that into the code, right? I think that was a CID recommendation. So I believe that is being incorporated, correct?
Okay, so, but if you are not expanding the footprint of your building, but you are doing a major renovation of the building and not changing use group, like I'm not going from a retail to, like a lot of times we get into change of use groups, but it's a major renovation, then does it enact the code at that time, or is it only upon expansion of your footprint?
I believe so. I believe that applies to a major interior renovation.
Okay.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Caleb, have you given any thought to whether the building is what has to come into compliance or whether it's the site? And do all the site requirements kick in if you have a building addition that's more than 25%?
Yeah, that's not really clear as far as the parking, as you know, it's making the site come into compliance. As far as street walls, you know, if you do an interior renovation, do you have to build a street wall along existing surface parking? And I don't know what the answer is to that. It's not really clear.
The question would be the open space.
Right.
You know, would you have to have like the 15% open space for the entire lot if you're only doing part of that lot?
Right.
Susan, I don't want to speak for you, but are you saying if you remodel a building by more than 25%, do you have to build it a second story?
I believe that, yeah, I think so.
Inclusive of an elevator?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That seems absurd.
I don't disagree.
Yeah,
with you.
Caleb, why are you doing
Right.
that?
Next time the consultant asks me, I'll let him know.
I think that's a thing that we're
Right.
going to come up against a lot because, you know, we specialize in renovation of historic structures or other structures,
Right.
and that comes up a lot, even if we're not changing use group. I know if we change use group, then that enacts different under current code and index different things.
Well, sure, and really, if the purpose of the form-based code is we care about what buildings look like, but we don't want to tear down historic buildings, you should be able to, in certain structures, do whatever you want to the inside as long as the outside is preserved. I mean, I don't think the intention is to tear down historic structures. In fact, I think.
That's how it's currently written.
Right.
And that's a good point that with our letter for downtown CAD roads is talking about trying to exempt a historic property. If you had a property that, say, wanted to expand by the percentage, it would trigger maybe the second floor. That could compromise its historic standing. For instance, Billiards on Broadway, if they were to go out a little bit in the back, would that mean they have to come into compliance, which would change their historic status? So
It's worse than that. How can anybody afford to remodel their building if they're required to add a second story? So as a consequence, nobody remodels. That doesn't raise property values, that lowers them.
And it pushes growth outward. I mean, you're either gonna grow out or you're gonna grow up. If you want downtown to Columbia, or if you want downtown to Columbia to look the same way in 20 years, you're forcing change somewhere else. And where is that gonna go, you know? Columbia has a good problem, we're growing.
Does anybody have any other questions? We have 2 more of these that are gonna go on the next week, next Tuesday, June 28th. We'll have one here, and obviously we're gonna try to get a webcast as well. 7:30 in the morning to 8:30. And then we'll have another one on July 13th, which I believe is a Wednesday. And we'll have that here in the same room from 4 to 5. So I encourage you guys to invite your friends, the other business owners. This is a very complicated process. There are a lot of questions, and I think it only helps move the process down the path if we have more voices involved in the process. I have a handout sheet with planning and zoning meetings between now and August. Please grab it, and thank you for coming today. And thank you for our president.
What is the verbiage to type into the search box in the city's website?
The easiest thing to put there is zoning code project planning.
Thank you.
Just put that in the search box and then that whole page will come up and you don't have to go through the different things. And I do have just some hard copies of just this little worksheet that I used in case you want to use it for reference. And if you give me your card, I'll send it to you electronically.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Here, you can put those on that.
here,
This